All right, we're back. We're live. This is ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidell. This morning, on a given Thursday, April 22nd, we're talking about talking tax with Tom Yamachika. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Great to be back, Jay. We do this every couple of weeks, and this legislative session has been even a little bit more.
Some people are highly critical of this legislative session, and the question is whether they will remain critical, as we go down toward the end of the session, which is not too far away, actually. Anyway, one of the things that happened this year, and I'm sure as a president of the Tax Foundation of Hawaii, you're really interested, is that we got something over $1 billion, $1.2 billion, $1.5 billion from President Biden's, relief act.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 1.6 billion.
1.6, thank you. And that's going to go to the state government. And the question is, what do we do with that? What do we do with that in a time of recession, in a time when we are struggling so hard, to bring the economy back to any kind of shape of normal? And when we have so many problems in terms of the session and balancing the budget and fiscal policy. So let me ask you, from a point of view of fiscal policy, Tom, I don't mean this to be an easy question, actually, I'm sorry. From a point of view of fiscal policy, what should happen in a session like this with a 1.6 billion infusion?
Well, let me, I guess, before I get to that, go through some history of what's actually happened. We have, as you mentioned, a legislature in session now. They are getting $1.6 billion from the federal government. And they announced on Monday, just a few days ago, that they have crafted a compromise, House and Senate compromise. The bill is, I believe, House Bill 200. And what they have said is that they've balanced the budget, which means all the money that has come in is accounted for. They are paying down some debt. There are no furloughs, so none of that kind of concessions are going to be required of the public workers unions, which is kind of a big thing to them. And there are no taxes in that budget bill. Okay. But there are taxes in other bills. And what we're
When you
talking
say
about
taxes,
today,
you mean tax increases, don't you?
of course I do. Yeah, in other proposals, uh, there are a myriad of other tax increases. We talked before about the capital gains tax. That's, I believe, House Bill 313. And we talked about the Franken bill that has a whole bunch of tax increases that were proposed by the Senate, rejected by the House, and now being reproposed by the Senate in House Bill 58. So that is still on the table. Both of those bills are still going through conference committee gyrations, and no agreement has been announced yet. We wanted to find out what actually is in the budget bill because it had been agreed on Monday, but the conference draft hasn't been released yet. And it turns out that the people who are in the know are really keeping their cards close to the chest because, I talked to somebody I know in the House Finance Committee, and he says he has no idea what's in it. And he said he talked to a couple of his colleagues, and they have no idea what's in it.
Transparency.
Transparency. Everything will have to come out by the end of the week because the final decking deadline for fiscal bills is Friday at 6 p.m. So the text is going to have to be known and published on the state legislature's website at that time.
That's
Now,
1 day away.
that's right, it's tomorrow. That bill is going to be massive because the whole state budget, and we would expect, that people, including myself, are going to need a couple of days at least to digest what the heck is in there. But that's what's coming. But the important part is uh, what the bill does, at least according to what we've heard in the media, is it doesn't raise taxes. Okay,
Hmm.
and uh, the reason why the tax bills are being kept alive is so that the rainy day fund that we have, which has been drawn down quite a bit now, it's I think at 50 million or less. Uh, they want to add another 100 million to it, and they want to do that by raising taxes. Which taxes we don't know, but what we hear is or at least somebody wants $100 million to be raised through new taxes.
Hmm.
And
Aren't we on a rainy day now?
yeah, that's what I think. So let's talk about fiscal policy as you started off the question. Uh, I think when you think about good fiscal policy, you have to ask yourself, well, where is our money coming from? If you're a business, for example, you have a key product or service, and you do pretty much everything it takes to keep that one going. You have a few sidelines, you might, give them up or sell them off, but every business has at least one key product or service uh, that they consider their core business, and that needs to be, protected and maintained at all costs, really. So you look at our tax system. More than more than the majority of funds coming into our tax system are from business taxes. The GE tax, which provides more than half, well, around half of general fund revenue, which is $3 or $3.5 billion, is a business privilege tax. Transientcom, tobacco, liquor, all of these specialty taxes are basically forms of business taxes as well, except they're on special industries. The second most productive tax we have is individual income tax. Why? Because individual income tax is imposed on number one, wage earners, and number two, businesses that aren't in corporate form, and between 75% and 90% of businesses are not in corporate form. You see, the there are no corporations to tax. You have your partnerships, you have your limited liability companies. They don't get taxed, but the owners do, and that's how the money goes into the tax system. So, with all of that dependence on business, I think the number one priority of our, legislature should be, let's take care of our business, keep that engine going, then we can kind of fund the other things that are around it. So, like when you're on an airplane, for example, and they tell you, okay, when when the air goes off, the oxygen masks appear. Who's the first person you put the mask on?
The
Yourself.
parent. Yeah.
Yourself. Uh, so you can assist others. So including people who don't have the ability to put the mask on themselves. Okay, and that's what I think should be driving fiscal policy. We ought to have a realization that you know our crisis isn't over. Okay, it's still raining. Uh, I wouldn't mind, putting a few extra dollars into the rainy day fund if it wasn't a rainy day. Okay, but uh, if you uh, raise taxes to increase the rainy day fund while it's still raining, what do you have the rainy day fund for?
That's my question.
That's your
Yeah.
question. Okay.
Let's look at the rainy day fund for a minute, Tom. You mentioned that it had been drawn down. It was roughly 50 million left. What did it start out with, and what is it intended to do? Where did that money get spent? The part that was drawn down.
The part that got spent, I believe, was on the normal expenses of government because the revenue stopped coming in.
Mhm.
Okay. In 2020, lots of business dried up. So transient accommodations tax, for example, is down 80%, 80. General excise tax was down like a quarter, 25%. Uh, those in state government are huge numbers. So, and people continue to work. People need to get paid uh, at the same level as before. So, how are they going to be paid, right? If the money doesn't come in from the tax revenue, it's got to come from somewhere else, and that's where the rainy day fund came in.
Okay, and one other question about what you said, furloughs. So now we don't have to have furloughs, but have we had furloughs, and for how long and why? And was that decision a good decision?
Well, we had furloughs maybe 10 years ago when we went through a similar economic crisis at the end of I think 2009-10 timeframe. Uh, during the Lingle administration, we had Fridays, affectionately known as furlough Fridays, were basically government shut down
Hmm.
and people weren't working because they needed to not pay people for that last day because that money wasn't around. So hopefully you would think that they would learn from that experience, uh, that an economic downturn really kind of forces um, money to come from places that it normally doesn't come from.
Mhm.
So those alternative funds or so forth need to be available for, in that instance, and that's what we had here. So we have the rainy day fund, and it's supposed to be used for this kind of purpose. It was used for this purpose, and we still borrowed some money from the federal government
Okay.
to
Well,
keep up. To keep it wasn't enough. You see,
well,
we had to borrow to keep up operations. We borrowed, I think, what's $700 million or so, 300 million, $300 million, something like that. It was
what's our total budget been? Roughly what?
14 billion, between 14 and 16 billion.
Hmm. Well, so let me ask you one other thing about, we haven't had furloughs then in this crisis over the past year. Am I right?
That's right.
Let me ask you a related question, and that is, have we actually uh, learned from this crisis to shrink government? Have we, I mean, people have been talking, oh gosh, for a long time, for decades, about how state government is bloated, that everybody's got a guarantee of a lifetime job, all that. And
Oh,
we
it
see,
goes past the lifetime. You know, lots of our state workers have post-retirement benefits. They have a
mhm,
defined benefit plan.
mhm.
They have the Employer Union Trust Fund, EUTF, which, if you're qualified for it, basically pays you for life. It takes care of your health care for life.
Yeah, it's, for a similar job in the private sector, you don't make as much. I mean, that's the way it's worked out. And you don't have the benefits, and you don't have this post-retirement benefit. So it's really extraordinary. And on top of that, a lot of those jobs in the private sector have been on hold or died during the COVID time. And yet this really hasn't touched the people in the government sector. So a dwindling group of taxpayers is supporting a bloated public sector. Did I say that right?
Uh, there's a lot of truth to that. One thing that the private sector has that the state government hasn't, at least so far, I think, is layoffs and closures.
Yeah,
Um, these are permanent. Layoffs are temporary.
yeah. Well, that's my point. Yeah. So it's not only risky, not only doesn't pay as well, but it's not guaranteed. And this post-retirement benefits, there's a lot of people who scrambled in a competitive fashion to get state jobs, and they're happy now. But the problem is that it's not good policy, is it? Or is that good policy? I mean, my view of it is, gee whiz, you have to even this out. You don't need a state government to be as big as it is in Hawaii, and you need to support the private sector. And if the private sector can get laid off and terminated, then state employees can get laid off and terminated too in a time of crisis. Do
Yeah, I
you agree?
certainly believe in sharing the pain.
Yes.
I mean, there shouldn't be just one set of people whom this economic crisis is being foisted upon.
Yeah. So let's move to another topic that until this morning was enough to make your blood boil. The legislature was going to give itself a raise. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a legislative salary commission that issued findings, and according to the mechanism set forth in the law as it now exists, raises for lawmakers were supposed to automatically kick in this year, and they kick in automatically unless the legislature passes some kind of legislation to stop it or defer it. And nobody was thinking about stopping or deferring it until very, very recently. So, so recently they've kind of revived a vehicle that defers the pay raises for legislators to, what is it, 2024? Um,
2023, I think.
yeah. Uh, when you in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big number, but the optics is horrible.
Well, that's
When you
probably
see
what
the,
made them think twice about it.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not much money, but you think legislators are fattening their own pockets at the expense of everybody else, and just the optics is terrible.
Well, it's even worse in the fact that last year was completely, I shouldn't say completely, but very nearly completely unproductive. The legislature wasn't really even in session for most of the spring of 2020. And this year they're doing a lot of things, but that I can't see whether it's all warranted, but they're getting a lot of criticism for what they've been doing. You've been following on all that?
I've been following some of it. I understand you had our good state auditor on the show a couple of days ago.
Hmm.
That must have been very interesting. I certainly want to watch that.
Well,
And
it's a peek through the keyhole, you know. It's you know, you can't say that it's all things that the legislature does, but it sort of gives you a view um, of of how well they're operating, doesn't it?
or not, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's really concerning to me is this part of the legislative session, which is really the most crucial part, is shrouded in secrecy. It always has been. The only time the conference committee meets is when they're ready to discuss a proposed conference draft that has not been released to the public, that the public knows nothing about. Um, Public testimony is not permitted. Public comment is not permitted, and only after the agreement is made um, does the public see what's going on.
Yeah, and you have that bait and switch possibility also that the bill could be completely revised in the back room. You know?
Yeah, that's a possibility too, and it's happened in some years that a bill like and it has a kind of broad title like relating to taxation. It says A when it goes in a conference committee, and it says something completely different when it comes out.
And the
Uh,
public never had a chance.
yeah. Now, granted, there's a lawsuit in the Supreme Court of Hawaii that's challenging that. Uh, the final decision of the Supreme Court hasn't come out yet, and that may or may not put some curbs on this gut and replace and Frankenbill tactics. But as of right now, they're still um, in the legislators' playbooks.
Now, what makes this more complicated? Let me complexify. We have unfunded liabilities coming left and right, and we used to dwell more on this than we do now. But let me just try to remember a few of them. One is the homeless problem, huge problem, and to solve the problem, you have to put money on it. It's unfunded, and we don't know how much. We only know it's going to cost billions to fix it. That's one thing. Climate change. is another thing. We're, in the middle of the ocean with the ocean lapping all around us. We have sea level rise, and the university tells us that a lot of our beaches, and including our beaches in Waikiki, are going to go away. This is central to the engine of our economy, and I don't think we're doing anything about it. But one day we'll have to do something about it, and it will cost. Assuming we do it, it'll cost billions. Where's that coming from? Talk about
Yeah,
rainy
that's
days.
definitely one thing that people who get elected to elective office here in our state have to deal with. Uh, their their real job, I think, in the square building, is to figure out the vision for our state, the priorities that we have to set to address all of these topics, within our means. What our means are, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is some sentiment at the legislature for uh, saying, okay, well, we haven't reached our means yet, so we need to ask taxpayers to chip in more.
Well, I don't
And
know what
then,
the answer is, but I only started my list. On climate change, you also have extreme weather, which could blow the house down. What will it take to protect against that? What will it take to, resurrect the brick and mortar of our community and our society? That's a lot of money.
yeah,
And
I mean, if you think it's a problem of government in the first place, now, government cannot be all things to all people. And one of the things that we got to do, uh, if you're in government, is to figure out what's your proper role. Okay, what can you affect? Do you concern yourself with the here and now? Do you concern yourself with the future? I think you do a little of both, and that's what everybody's been doing. And the question is how you prioritize the many needs that our society has, and there are a lot of them.
those needs seem more exigent now than they were before. Those needs they could actually, make Hawaii uninhabitable. And and of course, the government should be interested in the loss of the tax base, because if it's uninhabitable, people are going to leave. They're going to go to the mainland. They're going to go somewhere else. They're not going to do their lives here. As a result, fewer people involved in industry and in productivity, fewer people paying taxes, and so forth. And we could be a backwater in virtually no time with some of these things. So it's in the interest of state government to protect against. You can say that we should all have insurance against storms and the like, but it's also in the interest of state government to protect us, and people have an expectation that the government will protect us. So my concern is that we're not prepared, we're not resilient, we're not fiscally planned, and as a consequence, any one of them, and I haven't named all my risk factors, but as a consequence, any of these things happen, and any of them are unresolved and unplanned and unfixed. At the end of the day, this place could be a backwater, which is not what anyone wants, but which we look to government to protect against. So you say we have to balance between the present and the future, but the future, it doesn't seem we have balanced in favor of the future. It doesn't seem we have any real plan, and we certainly don't have the money.
Well, that I think is undeniable. One thing that even politicians have to remember is that a lot of people are focused on the present day. Um, you talk about, okay, well, what happens in 100 years? Uh, Most people are living paycheck to paycheck, so uh, they're more focused on what happens on Friday. Do I get a paycheck or not? If I don't, how do I feed my family? I think once that kind of crisis mentality is kind of more dealt with, can we really focus on stuff in the future? we do have a lot of present needs, like uh, infrastructure in our schools, colleges, and so forth. That has been kind of deferred and deferred and deferred upon deferred for too long. Uh, there was a business group that came out with kind of its assessment of that. I think about a year ago. That really ought to be required reading for our legislators.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's go to one other hypothetical here. So we have this 1.6 billion coming in, and it's going back into the rainy day fund. And we've agreed that we are in a rainy day, but in fact, we're not drawing down on that rainy day fund right now. But let's suppose we run into another rainy day, and it could be a Hawaii specific rainy day. Let's say we have a bad hurricane season coming soon, and it blows the house down in Oahu, not Kauai, but in Oahu. And all of a sudden, our industry, our society is stopped cold. Is that enough? That 1.6 billion, and I'll add the 50 million on there that you said was left in the rainy day fund. 1.6 billion and 50. Is that enough? And what does the state government do then to, resurrect our daily lives?
Go to Washington D.C. and beg for help. Really, that's what they would have to do.
Yeah.
Because
And beg is the operative word because you're never sure what's going to happen when you beg.
that's right.
There's an article in the Washington Post this morning about Puerto Rico and about how Trump actually blocked aid to Puerto Rico back at the time of, what was it, Maria. And then there was an investigation into what happened, why the aid did not reach Puerto Rico. It was billions. It did not reach Puerto Rico. And then, even more scandalous, Trump stopped the investigation so that nobody ever knew there was even an investigation. And thus, they didn't know that he had stopped the aid. But I just mentioned that, not to say that Joe Biden would ever do that, but I just mentioned that just if you have to go begging to Washington, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, whether your delegation is going to be successful, whether you're going to be able to make the case. If there are other crises going on in other states, that you're in competition for the money, etc.
Right.
Yeah. So what else can you do? Raise taxes.
If you raise taxes, you're basically kicking people when they're down. Um, and I don't think that's what we need.
Isn't that what we're kind of doing now? We're raising taxes, even though we have the money. We're raising taxes, even though arguably we don't need it right now. We're raising taxes when we're in a recession, and we have to take all steps possible to raise up the economy. Isn't that the net effect here? Is that the money that's coming in from Washington is going in the bank, it's going in the rainy day fund, but it is not being used for what president, had intended, is it?
That's a big problem.
And if I were the president and I got a request in extremis, the next time from Hawaii, I say, oh, you guys, you just want to bank it, don't you? You don't want to use this for what I want you to use it for. I'm concerned about that, aren't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, the feds are giving disaster aid but they're imposing more and more conditions on it. So that's what we have to look forward to in the future, I think.
Well, last area to talk about with you, Tom, is the optics thing. As we discussed, the optics of the legislature giving themselves a raise this year in the difficulties of COVID and reopening, and an economy that's still arguably failing. That's bad optics. But what about the optics now going forward? What about the optics when people realize that there's going to be a tax increase? What kind of optics is this going to be something that the public is concerned about it, or is it going to get right by them?
Well, I think a lot of that's going to be dependent on how various people in the public really react to it. The last time um, they were proposing something radical in terms of taxation, that was, I think, the teachers' constitutional amendment. There was a lot of galvanizing that went on in the business community. A public campaign went out. Um, that I think is the kind of thing that would have to happen if something really bad is proposed.
The end of the day, it's the press, and it's those issues that people don't want to cover. It's those issues that stay under the blankets, those issues that never see the transparency and the light of day they should see. So it becomes all the more important in these times for the press to cover this. I don't mean just ThinkTech, and I'm happy that you and I are talking about it, but I think every single journalist ought to be looking for these sacred cows that are being kept sacred, especially in times of, relatively speaking, in times of crisis.
Yeah, we certainly have a crisis now, and we need more people to focus on it, and what the right solutions are.
So what do you see going forward on the economy? This isn't necessarily going to help to put what amounts to incentive money in the bank instead of spending it for incentives. Um, how are we going to do on raising up the economy and reopening?
Uh, like I said, one of the things that we got to concentrate on is how to get our economic engine revving again. Um, a lot of that entails getting out of the way of the private sector. Uh, I think there was some news this morning that Maui had vetoed a bill requiring even more uh, affordable housing contribution for every development on Maui. Uh, that veto, Mike Victorino basically said, look, we can't, uh, keep getting in the way of the private sector. It's going to have, bad economic consequences. I think he's right, and that's kind of a microcosm of what's, going on generally. So I think we need, more of, hey, let's get this economy restarted. Let's help business along. Uh, if there are some in the public sector who would experience pain, well, uh, have a taste of what the private sector has been experiencing this last year and a half.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears, Tom. Tom Yamachika, President of Tax Foundation of Hawaii. Thank you so much for this discussion, for coming around. I look forward to talking to you a couple of weeks from now.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for having me on the show.
Aloha, Tom.